Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome everybody, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Jess Badley, who's the head of HR and OD at Blood Cancer UK. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. And it's a real pleasure having somebody like you that's doing not only phenomenal work in the arena of well-being in the workplace, but also what your charity really does. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're doing as far as helping people do amazing work within Blood Cancer UK. But I'd love to know more about your backstory, because I know that you've not always worked in HR, Jess. So yeah, how did you get into HR?
Absolutely. I haven't always worked in HR. And I think had you asked me at university what career I thought I would end up in when I was approaching 40, I definitely wouldn't have said HR, not in a million years. So I completely unrelated degree. So I did history and then a master's in international relations. So nothing to do with HR at all. And then after that, I guess I did a mixture of things really. So some of that was more general management. So I have worked a lot around children and young people actually, but I started off in the private sector. And then from there moved into the charity sector, but more of an operations manager role. So HR was always part of it, but finance was probably the biggest part, all the facilities, looking after kitchens, things like that. So literally something goes wrong in a building, that ended up at my door. So, you know, those roles where you do just do like a little bit of everything.
Oh yeah, who's taken the last bit of milk?
always, where have the tea bags gone? All the really important things in an office.
Fundamental operational issues, Jess.
Exactly. I worked more in that kind of general management kind of arena, I guess, for quite a few years. And then gradually what I realized that I really, really liked and that I felt like I was able to give a lot to, but also I felt like I was making a positive difference to the organization, was around whenever I dealt with people. And actually, the more that I started looking into things like, actually, how do you get a good performance management system? Because so many places I've worked, we did annual appraisals, which I'm sure loads of people have done, might still be doing. But I think most people listening would agree that as soon as you do it, you're like, what is the point of this? Why am I doing this? And when I started looking into it,
trauma therapy.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone's like, oh no, it's that time of year again. Here's my 10-page form to fill in. The more I started reading about it, the more I realized that actually there's a career in making things like that much better for people and actually making a workplace a really great place to work. And as soon as I realized that actually that's what HR was about, I was like, why didn't I know this 10 years ago? I would have done it straight away. But yes, now I'm firmly in HR as a career and absolutely love it.
That does make me smile. My last appraisal when I worked in HR, I actually had a wonderful relationship. I was the head of HR for British Airways Holidays, and I had a brilliant relationship with Kath Onions, who was the customer service director. My appraisal was about 3 hours, which I'm not sure if that was entirely focused on performance or just the fact that we got on so well and she was such an inspirational leader. But I know what you mean. It's like a competency-based interview. You start scratching your head and thinking, how do I meet all of the competencies in the competency framework? So You mentioned about HR, actually a big part of it making it, an organization a great place to work. And it reminds me of how the role of HR's changed. I mean, I've not worked in human resources for, 11 years now, but did work in it for a good 10 years for a number of different organizations. And I've certainly seen the role of HR evolve significantly. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing in terms of how HR has changed and grown and evolved?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even when I moved into HR as a field, which was still a good few years ago now, I think there was almost like an expectation that as in HR you sort of you count things and you check up on people, and that's how you know you're doing things properly. So for example, you'd talking about appraisals again, you would just check who's sent the form back and what score you've got, however you're rating it, but nothing around actually what difference is that making to the organizational performance. Like, is that process meaning that you meeting your KPIs? Is it improving your bottom line? And if it's not, why are you doing it? So there was none of that kind of analysis. It was just like, let's count it. If someone hasn't filled the form in, let's just chase them every day until they fill it in and send it to us. And there's always lots of activity in HR, as there is in every profession, but some of it is just not useful to anyone. And I think from what I've seen and from a lot of other practitioners I've spoken to is that actually most people in HR can tell you straight away what is the value add activities and which ones, if they were allowed to, if they can, they will just drop because it's not helping anyone. And I think though gradually as a profession we've got more confident in being able to say that in an organisation, and to say actually we've got all these other great skills that aren't being used if we're just counting things and filling in Excel checklists, etc. So I think that's been really positive. And I think from my experience, like, sometimes HR gets a really bad reputation. But all the professionals that I work with, speak with, usually people go into HR because they really care about people, and they didn't go into HR for a career in administration. They might have got stuck in a role like that, but actually usually that's not what we're here for. And I think then when people have been able to break out of that mold, as it were, we've seen some really good improvements. So I think especially in the past 2 years, things like Wellbeing, a lot of organizations have got so much better at that, and that's often been led by a HR team or some standalone HR professionals. And I think using data and using analytics to really improve that organizational performance, I think there's been a huge change in that. So now HR isn't just a little office in the corner. Actually, if you use HR in the same way that you would use your finance team or your analytics team, can have the same real improvement in how an organization performs.
Absolutely. And that is literally music to my ears, Jess. It really is. Because I know it's interesting, isn't it? Because where we did as a profession evolve from those days of personnel, which, yes, we had a very different nuance to it, that it has certainly evolved as strategic partners. And I loved what you said there about utilizing HR and its functionality in the same way that we might with a finance business partner, really looking at the data. What's the data telling us so that we can help to influence the strategy? And yet, I also find with HR that some of them are still not using analytics. Some of them maybe don't even, I did actually have a conversation with one organization. Now, it might be because of the country that they're in. It was an organization in Europe, and they don't measure absence whatsoever. So they couldn't tell me any data when it came to mental health, when it came to well-being, number of days. Well, they probably could have told me number of days sickness because they do pay sick pay, but they couldn't give me any data. So when they were looking at arranging management mental health training, it was quite it was quite a task to understand, well, what do you need if you don't know what you need? Does that make sense? And I still see some organizations that maybe they're not utilizing HR databases or HR platforms to track the analytics. And I don't know if that's just, organizations that I've had conversations with, or is that something that you see with your colleagues or not?
So I think sometimes absolutely I'd agree. And I think previously, when I think back to other teams I've worked in, I think sometimes where we've not measured it, it's because we just haven't sat down and thought, what data do we need to make this a better workplace? So exactly like you said, it's like, oh, okay, I think my managers want some training, or the managers have asked for the training, but I haven't got my baseline underneath to know why that is. And I think so. One thing that we do at Blood Cancer UK in the HR team is we do kind of half yearly, sort of just mini away days where just us as a team go somewhere else we can't be disturbed and just really think about, what do we think the issues are? Well, what data do we need to know to make that better, or to check our assumptions, and how are we going to measure that? And it doesn't even take very long. Maybe a half an hour to sit and think, right, that's our plan for 12 months. How do we know it's right? What data do we need? We're a small team as well. There's 3 of us. But actually that's all we need, is just a little bit of space to think about, how do we check what we're doing is actually the right thing?
Absolutely. And again, music to my ears, because often when it comes to well-being in the workplace, one of the very first questions that I ask any organization that approach us is, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and why are you trying to achieve that? And really thinking about that big picture perspective. So looking at the analytics, as you say, and trying to provide that baseline so that you can also measure it is absolutely fantastic. And how have you measured some of the things that you've done at Blood Cancer UK around wellbeing?
So I guess we try and use a few different ways of measuring, really. So one of our main ways, though, is we ask our entire staff team quite regularly what they think about different things. So we do that. We do a quarterly pulse survey, which is normally 10, maximum 11 questions if we really can't decide between 2. But we try and keep it quite short. So the idea is if we're going to ask someone to fill in a survey every 3 months, if we ask them to if we say it'll take you 2 minutes, people will go, all right, that's reasonable, I'll do that, fit that in my week. If we do any longer, we need to be, really think about how we make people's time available for that. So 2 minutes every quarter works well for us. We tend to get 80 to 90% completion rates, which is good. So we know we're getting quite a good picture.
Brilliant.
They're also anonymous, because although I would love to think that we had an organisation where everyone could say if they had any worries, any concerns, any disagreement, I know in practice that that's very different for different people. And so actually we do anonymous surveys for that reason. And we get a lot of data actually through that. So there's always an option for people just to say agree, disagree. But there is always a comment box. And actually, the more we've done it, the more people have put in the comment box what they think, which is brilliant. And that really then gives us a chance, like I say, every 3 months to get an idea if what we're doing is working, but also if there's any other issues kind of maybe bubbling underneath the surface that just haven't come to the 3 of us yet. So it's a good check for us that we're not missing things. And it's a good check as well. I think sometimes, for example, we'll say, oh, it feels like everyone's really busy. Maybe we should ask about people's, capacity. Have they got too much work to fit in a week? And sometimes we ask that and people will say, yeah, actually, I'm really busy. We could do with some help around prioritization. But other times we've thought that and people have said, no, I'm fine. That's not the problem. It's just that there's loads going on externally and I feel quite distracted, and actually what we could do with is some reminders on, how to switch off from social media, and things like that. So for us, just constantly talking to the whole team and saying, how are you? What do you need? Has been really helpful, and make sure we haven't just gone off on our little HR bubble and said, this is what everybody needs.
I'm glad to hear you haven't gone off on an HR bubble and you're actually asking those questions. And I loved what you said there, Jess, about really going back and digging deeper, because that term busy, I mean, it's one of my pet hates when people, because it's like I get asked that question all the time. Now I go to the hairdressers, are you busy today? I'm like, why can't you ask me if I'm happy? Can we change some of the questions that we ask each other? Go to the supermarket, are you busy today? Oh goodness. But it's that kind of, as you said, what does the term even mean? Because I've yet to meet any organization that says we're not busy. You know, they're always going to say we're really fast paced. I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? Are there people like literally running around the office? What does fast paced, what does busy mean? Because we know that busy doesn't actually mean productive. And so I loved what you said there about actually what does it mean, and what do people actually need? Is it to help with prioritization, to look at process improvement? You know, if I think back to my old uni days, Kaizen. Do you remember Kaizen? Continuous improvement. I'm not sure how much we do that anymore, but yeah, absolutely looking at our systems and processes, and where we can reduce things and subtract things to make us more efficient. So do tell me, what are some of the key things that you've done, particularly over the last few years, Jess, around wellbeing in the workplace? Because I know that you also won an award in 2021 for the Culture Pioneers Award, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's right. We were so pleased with that, because like I said, we are a really small team, and like I'm sure lots of people listening will see as well. But if you try and go for awards in whatever team you work in, sometimes you see these absolutely ginormous corporations in the like the shortlist with you, and you're like, oh, we're not going to win that then, because they've got a HR team of like 700 people. We can't compete. So actually, when someone says, actually, for your size, you do an incredible amount, and you know, you can show the impact. Yeah, that recognition was really lovely. It was a great boost for us. But yeah, so what we've been doing, well, I mean, initially when I came into the organisation, we decided that getting to know the organisation from a wellbeing perspective was really important. So the initial wellbeing strategy we built up, I guess, from the bottom up. So rather than us just saying to the senior managers, what do your teams need? We went the other way and said to all our colleagues, what would be helpful? What have you seen in other organisations? What have you not seen that you think we should have? We gave people suggestions, because obviously just giving someone a blank canvas can be really tricky for anyone to give you suggestions. So we sort of said, these are our ideas. What do you think? What's missing? What wouldn't work? And from that, we got loads of responses. And actually, it was quite easy to build up that initial strategy of, okay, what are we going to do for the next 12 months? So we focused a lot on mental health. And I think that's really helped, because it is now feeling a lot more normal in the organisation for people to be able to say, I'm having a really tough time, or I'm starting to feel like that, you know, I went to that workshop on stress and I can sort of see some of these signs in myself. And so now we're trying to work towards the preventative end. So we've built in absolutely loads of support for people. And I would hope that anyone in the organisation would know where that is, would know to be able to signpost their colleagues, etc., how to get to it, which is brilliant. But yeah, now the next bit is that, how do we prevent as much as possible? Because of course you can't prevent everything, and not everything is work related. But we can always do more to try and support people at work. So we've recently been working around the concept around psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, this is so important, because we do have a team that lots of people, we would probably say like, yeah, we work really hard. It's quite fast paced as an organisation, like all of those cliches. And I think for us, when we dig down into it, what happens is, because everyone that works for us is really bought into our mission of beating blood cancer. And what that means then is that, yes, they can absolutely prioritise. Everyone that works for us is really great and really capable, but they also tend to try and do more than they can fit into a 35-hour week. And as we all know, that just builds up. You just say, oh, just do this one more thing and one more thing. And then you've worked 5 hours extra that week and you're really tired. So getting people to stop working is always our biggest wellbeing challenge, always, which is not the worst problem to have, but is equally really important to not let build up and become a culture, because, you know, it will take a lot of effort to beat blood cancer. But we've got a wider community to help us do that. We've got all the fantastic researchers that are working right now, all the people that fundraise for us in the communities. So trying to get people just to recognise that it's okay to stop work, in that, yes, we could all keep working forever. There would always be something else to do, but it won't all add the same amount of value. And that for people to be able to say to their manager, actually, I think I've taken on a bit too much. Can I give some of it back? Can we pause some of it? Can we prioritise it? Having that culture is just really important for us, because we're never going to get to a point where people go, yeah, that's fine, I'm not bothered. I don't care if I don't finish that. And I don't want to work in a place like that either. So it's just making sure people have got that confidence to know they can say, actually, I might have taken on 3 projects more than I could do this month.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you said about prevention over cure, because that's something that at the Mind Solution we're so passionate about, because I know, having been a therapist as well for 10 years, I've sat in front of thousands and thousands of people. And that combination of HR and therapy, I was like you, I would always sort of think, well, what's got somebody to this point in the first place? And how could it have been prevented? And as you say, sometimes things are going to happen that can throw us out of balance. You know, getting a diagnosis of blood cancer, that's a huge amount of emotion to process. Losing a loved one, going through a miscarriage, and any number of significant life events. And then, even then, we can do so much to prevent us spiraling, so that we don't completely feel powerless, so that we have resources that can help us to manage our moment-to-moment responses. But for a lot of people who, I don't know, I worked with, that were burnt out because I'll just do that one more thing, I'll just do that one more thing, or they were working in an environment or a culture where there was almost an unspoken expectation that you had to finish things. And so, sitting in front of a lot of people, I would ask those questions like you, Jess. Actually, what do we need to give people the understanding of, the awareness of, so that they can start to work smarter and not harder? And I know certainly from a lot of the work that we do with organizations, even just explaining that the minute we're in the stress response, we're in survival mode. And the only thing that the body's concerned with is a threat to life. It doesn't know the threat to life is another email in our email box, doesn't know that it's looking at that to-do list and thinking, oh, got quite a lot on my plate tomorrow. But that actually you are in survival mode, and the executive functions of the brain, you don't have access to them. So if we think about so many of the things that we need to perform at that consistent high standard, like we need to be able to think creatively, we need to be able to put things in perspective, that big picture decision making, to be able to be innovative. You know, I see a lot of job descriptions, you know, we need you to be innovative. And it's like, well, we can't be creative and innovative. Can't get it out this morning. We can't do that if we're out of homeostasis, you know, if we're in that stress response. And what I always find really fascinating is when you start to explain that to people, or you start to explain it to business leaders, and they start to join the dots between performance, high performance, and actually what we need to do at that prevention over cure. And it's like you start to see them getting those insights and light bulb moments and go, Okay, this isn't just about mental health. This is actually about what do people need to be productive in the workplace. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And talking about the workplace and what you were mentioning about, the anonymous surveys and thinking about culture. And I know certainly the more research that we do here, there's so much around the link between culture and the impact that that can have on people's mental health and well-being, and a lot of toxic cultures that people have worked in. And even you mentioned psychological safety. We posted something this week about how people were more likely to lie to their managers about the reason that they were calling in sick, because they didn't trust their managers, they didn't trust their leaders. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are around that, Jess.
Yeah, and I think, I've seen that happen, definitely. I think probably everyone's worked in somewhere like that, haven't they, in their career at least once. And I think you often see it from HR as well. So if you're in an organisation where, and I would say, I've worked in places where you end up with a lot more kind of employee relations things. So things like people get taken down sickness capability routes or disciplinaries, etc. And so many times in those organizations, as a HR professional, you sit and talk to that person and they will say, yeah, my manager thinks I'm lazy or I'm lying. And I haven't been able to tell them what actually is the problem. And it just means by that point, they're even more stressed because they think they're going to lose their job. And actually, had they been able to be honest, because that culture was there, you could have done all that support right back then and hopefully then help that employee who can then hopefully stay in the role, which is obviously always what you want to do if you possibly can. I think it's such a huge thing, isn't it? And if a culture's not right in an organization, that's often why people leave. I think it's definitely why I often would leave or think about it. And I think it's one of those things, though, that takes sometimes a really long time to change. And I think actually one thing that we found at Blood Cancer is I don't think we have a culture like that. I really hope our staff would say, no, we absolutely can be honest and we can get support. But actually, one thing that came up in a manager's session I was running recently was some of the line managers saying to me, yeah, it's great here, but I've got so used to in other organisations not being able to be open that actually it takes a little while, even in an atmosphere that is good, to feel safe enough. Even though I know that I can be honest, it's still hard. There's still that bit in your brain that goes, oh, should I say that though? Should I be honest? So, you are bringing baggage with you from another organisation sometimes, which will always take some time to kind of build that confidence with people. Yeah.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, have you watched the Brené Brown talk on the anatomy of trust?
Yes.
Yeah, it really reminds me of that. And it's such the whole role of leadership and well-being, I just see they're just hand in hand, especially if we think about the way that HR's evolved. I think maybe in the past, well-being, mental health, it might have sat within the sort of HR arena. And yes, human resources are always going to be responsible for the workforce. But now where, in order to create those shifts and change those paradigms, we need leaders to understand and embrace this. And we don't necessarily need them involved in the delivery, but to be part of that process, to be part of that, what is the vision? What is it that we're trying to create here? And having input in that in the way that maybe they haven't in the past. Would you agree with that, Jess?
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think for most of us, our line manager is always going to be more important to us on a day-to-day basis at work. Like, yes, of course, I would love to think HR is really important in everyone's work life, but actually most of the time we're there when someone needs us, which is fine. If they're great and they don't need us very often, I'm very happy with that. But I think, yeah, usually for most of us, it's going to be your line manager you talk to first if something's not quite right. They're also probably the person that would see maybe a change in your behaviour first and might ask you if you're okay, hopefully. And so I think for line managers to feel comfortable that they can have those conversations and know that HR will always be there to help and support and coach whenever needed. And I think what we've tried to do is to really be clear with the line managers about what we think that role is. Mm-hmm. So we would say, for example, you should always ask if you think someone doesn't seem themselves, always ask, because you can never do any harm by just saying, are you okay? Do you want to have a chat? And what we try and do is say, we're not expecting you to try and fix somebody's problems, because you will never be able to do that and you shouldn't try. But what you can do is listen, and often that will be the biggest help for someone. You can also signpost to all the resources we've got, and you can signpost to HR, or you can set up a chat with someone in HR. But listening to that person is always going to be the best thing to do, and any manager can do that, and hopefully will be good at it because they've already got that working relationship. So I think the managers are really, really key. But equally, I don't think it adds anything to their, sometimes managers are a bit worried it's going to add a lot more things to their to-do list. But actually, I don't think it does. I think it's just part of what you would do as a manager anyway. And it's more about your feeling confident that you're doing the right thing and you know where to get extra help from.
Absolutely. I mean, I know myself, I've worked with some amazing managers in my time. I've also had some horrific managers. But if I think about the leadership traits of, my old HR director at Brighton and Sussex University Hospital, I had a fantastic relationship with her. I could have spoken to her about anything. My director at British Airways Holidays, so many places. Even I know that my Jonathan Kay, he was my general manager when I was the head of HR at the Grand Brighton Hotel. I know I could have spoken to him, because all of them, the thing that they all consistently had in common was they treat you like a human being. And they took the time from a very genuine place to get to know you. My boss, Kath, I went to her wedding in Bermuda. It was fabulous working at British Airways Holidays. I miss my concession flights. But yeah, they took the time to really get to know their people. They really valued their people. I remember Jonathan was amazing. He would walk around the hotel absolutely every day, stick his head around the door. How are you doing? How are you getting on? So it was a very personable, very intimate relationship. So there wasn't anything necessarily that they were doing in a tick box way to create trust, to create that psychological safety. And they were also very authentic. They weren't, let's think about the best way to maybe phrase this. It's like they weren't trying to be great leaders. They were just naturally great because they were authentic. That psychological safety, one of the things that we often talk to about managers is it's something you can't really hang your hat on. It's a feeling. It's that unconscious feeling, thinking about our five senses that just let us know intuitively that you feel safe. But you see that in your leaders on a consistent basis. And yeah, it makes such an impact to be able to have conversations. I remember certainly, Kath, I was starting to study solution-focused psychotherapy and hypnotherapy when I still worked in HR. And I'd come back after my weekends and I'd just be like buzzing, because I was maybe a bit ahead of my time, because I saw the missing link in the workplace kind of 11 years ago. And she'd say, you know, how was the weekend? And I'm like, right, we need to do this, we need to do this. And, you know, it was just even just taking that time to just check in and ask those questions. But I also know a lot of organizations, a lot of the managers that we've trained have been really open and honest and said, well, actually, I don't do that. They do now. Now they've gone through our management mental health training, they can see the value of it. But they were really honest and said, yeah, we just kind of dive straight into conversations about, you know, what's going on in the day, performance, projects, KPIs, work. There wasn't really that human interaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely resonates. And I think, yeah, I think sometimes when I'm talking about some of the initiatives we've done in the past couple of years, some people will say like, oh, you know, did you have external help, or how much did it cost? And actually, the one common thing that we found is actually, no, it was actually just spending the time with people to explain what we were doing, why, check in with them, see how it's going, like what did we not think about, what do people need help with, what extra training might they need, or coaching. So much of what we do as a HR team is actually giving our time to people. And I think it's exactly that as a manager, isn't it? It's, you know, are you there when people need you? And like, you know, it might be that you check in with someone for 6 months every, you know, and they're fine. But then one day you'll ask them and they'll be like, actually, I'm not fine. And, you know, you'll then make such a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly one of the things that we also talk about is the fact that mental health is a byproduct. It's a byproduct based on your reaction to either a life event or just how we're reacting on a day-to-day basis. And if we're not able to regulate our emotions, then things are going to build up. You know, if we consistently, as you say, putting in those extra hours and we're not decompressing, we're not switching off, then it's like trying to drive a car that eventually runs out of petrol. And you wouldn't do that. You would stop and you'd refuel. But as humans, we sometimes think that we're like Wonder Woman and Superman, and that we can keep going without that refuel, that switching off. But I do find the more that we educate people about the brain, about the body, about the mind, that they start to join those dots and go, okay, this is why I need to do something. And maybe some of that education is lacking. So people they don't know what they don't know. And so they just keep doing what they've always done because it makes sense to them. But I loved what you said about the listening, because again, something that we teach is the value of really listening. And something that I certainly share is that if you can increase your listening skills by literally just 1%, you'll increase your impact by 1,000%. And it's really interesting because a lot of people, they maybe initially think that they're quite good listeners, and then they do some of our exercises and go, oh, okay, I've not been listening. I've been waiting to respond. We were doing some training yesterday, and we were teasing some of the managers that were, I call them conversation hogs, that they steal back the conversation and make it about them because the other person happens to be talking about something, and they're like, oh, I've got an idea, I can share something. And like you say, they can feel like they can jump in and fix. And it's like, no, just listen. Because we just don't really listen. We're so distracted these days, aren't we?
Yeah, so distracted. And I think, at some points, absolutely everyone is guilty of doing that, aren't they? And I think we've actually found that as well, like in a hybrid workplace. So for a long time, people were kind of used to having, you know, just those sort of discussions in a room and being able to pick up on all body language. And then on a screen, obviously, all of a sudden, you've lost quite a lot of the body language part of it. So if you're really not listening to the words as well, like the chances of you missing something quite important, I think, are huge.
Absolutely. But even just getting that sense of connection, you know, we don't need to be in the same room to feel a connection, because again, it's one of those very unconscious things. And I certainly know that at the beginning, people all had their cameras on, but I know that's one of the things that I hear managers struggling with, is how to now engage people online, because people have become more, they're not switching their cameras on as much. Now, we can still create a sense of connection, but it's a lot harder if you're speaking to a blank screen. Are you coming across that with your managers, Jess, in terms of managing people remotely?
Yes, and I think actually for us, it first flagged up that people were just getting screen fatigue, like everybody. So for example, when the pandemic first hit, we were like, right, everyone check in with your teams every day. And at the time, that was absolutely the right thing to do. And we were saying, everyone have your cameras on all the time. And at that point, that was the right thing to do, because everyone was starting to feel isolated and really bewildered. But as time wore on, what we realized was that for some people, they didn't particularly need that. Actually, they weren't feeling that isolated. They were absolutely fine working from home and now prefer it. So we were like, okay, we don't need to do a one size fits all. Do what works with your teams. And also that, we are often quite poor as an organisation about, we love a meeting. And that is definitely something we're still working on. It's like, is this a meeting? Could this have been an email or a 2-minute Teams chat? We're getting better, but mid-pandemic, we were absolutely awful at it. And so people were like, I'm in 7 meetings. I just don't want to look at the screen for that long. I would quite like to just have the audio, be able to look around the room and just talk. And actually we were
ironing, doing the washing up in the background,
having your lunch. No, people should be taking lunch breaks. But eating snacks, you don't always want to do that on screen, do you? So we were like, okay, we need to rethink this. And because obviously the other part is that if someone is becoming isolated and withdrawing, if they turn the camera off all the time, that might be a real sign for a manager that that's happening. So we were like, okay, how on earth do we get this balance in the middle? So we've tried to say to managers now is just have that conversation with your team. So like how you're going to work as a team, but also then individually when you do your one-to-one catch-ups. Because some people will say, I really love having the camera on. So I always prefer having a camera on. But if it's an all staff meeting and I'm not talking, my camera doesn't need to be on. That's not adding anything for anyone particularly. Mm-hmm. And what some teams actually have moved to, which is working really well for them, is they didn't really want the camera on all the time. But equally, that talking to like the icon or a blank screen just feels a bit impersonal. So actually what some teams have talked to is actually just go back to telephone calls.
Okay.
And often what they do then is they'll make those into walk-in calls as well. Mm-hmm. Because what some people were saying is that actually, I still want to be able to talk to my manager. I don't want my camera on all the time. But if I'm out walking, actually, sometimes I find that a bit easier because I think there's quite a lot of evidence that if you're walking, it kind of sometimes just frees up your thoughts or your emotions a little bit.
Absolutely.
And so if we just theme it, like that's quite unconfrontational, having a phone call and having a walk outside. But actually, some of the managers have started to report back that is working really well. And that sometimes people feel able to share when they're not feeling that great, and they find it easier than they would with a camera on. Mm-hmm. And so just, I guess, having that menu of options for people to try, that seems to be working for us at the moment.
Well, that's good to hear. That is good to hear. And I'm curious about thinking about business leaders and HR in terms of the future of either wholly remote working people or this hybrid model. Because if we think particularly in the context of mental health, people do get very good at hiding things. Even thinking about addiction, how do you know that somebody might have a problem with alcohol if they don't ever have their camera on and they come up with all kinds of reasons? So yeah, I'm curious to see how organizations are going to respond to this new world, just being mindful of that. But my sense is that the more that leaders, as we've talked about, have that connection, that human connection with people, that we should be able to pick up on those signs that somebody might be hiding something, you know, those telltale signs. But what are your thoughts around that, Jess?
Yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? Because you know, if you were to miss something, like, it's no one's fault, but you would feel terrible. Yeah, so I think, well, one of the things we've talked about as a staff team is actually making sure that everybody, from a colleague perspective, also knows what some of those signs might look like. So, you know, what we said is that actually, you know, for example, if you are brand new into the workplace, it might be your first or second job, you might be a bit less confident about saying that something is wrong for lots of reasons. And so we've said, well, okay, in that situation, then actually it might be one of your colleagues who works with you quite closely, even if it's remote and you're not in an office together. A colleague might see something a lot faster. And also, if they say, do you want to just get a cup of tea and a catch up for 10 minutes? That in itself might then, you know, they can still signpost to any external support. They could still get in touch with us in HR. It doesn't have to be a manager. Yeah. And I think for us, trying to create that, you know, that community within the workplace where people will look out for each other, I think is really, really important, because a manager can't ever do it all by themselves.
Yeah.
And you know, our staff are really happy to do that. And I think what you're saying about senior leaders as well is really correct, because I think the more that they are able to share when things aren't going well for them, again, it's just creating that sense of this is everybody. This is what life is like. It's fine to share when things haven't gone wrong, and it's fine to say I've messed up, and it's really fine to say I just don't feel great, and that's nobody's fault. You haven't done anything wrong. And I'm really lucky that the directors we have at Blood Cancer UK are all happy to do that. They don't do it all the time, and they still don't find it easy, but they understand that the difference it makes if they are open about things and they are allowed to be vulnerable. Yeah. And of course, no one has to share anything they don't want to, but it really does just set a tone, I think, that is helpful across a whole organisation.
Yes. And it's interesting because this was a big conversation in some training that we were doing last week, where some managers felt that if they were perceived to not have all of their ducks in a row and, you know, be holding everything together, that was a sign of weakness, and that, you know, staff were looking at them to, you know, be role modeling. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you role modeling? You're role modeling that's something that's not realistic. You know, even as somebody that's got, you know, I wouldn't even say a toolbox, I would say a tool house. You know, I'm trained in that many modalities, but do I still sometimes, you know, knock myself out of balance? Absolutely, because I'm human and I'm not a robot. Do I know how to get myself back on track relatively quickly? Absolutely, absolutely. But it was also interesting because the question that I threw out to the group is, who would you trust more? A manager that is perceived to almost kind of have this perfectionism, that they've always got everything right and all the ducks in a row, or actually a manager that, you know, as we talked about, was more authentic, and that sometimes said, you know, I'm just really struggling because, you know, the kids have kept me up half the night. And, you know, or maybe they're just going through a difficult time because, you know, maybe one of their parents is, you know, going through an illness and they're having to sort of take on more caring responsibilities. And, you know, the vast majority, bar two, the vast majority of the groups that actually we'd trust that person. So it's understanding, as Brené Brown said, about that anatomy of trust, that human connection, that we're more likely to open up and feel safe to be vulnerable with somebody that we've seen do that themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, it's that label of mental health, that mental health is just the byproduct of the kind of events that we do go through. You know, if you've got a new baby and you're not sleeping, is it possible that you're going to start feeling quite overwhelmed, and maybe that's going to spiral into stress. Or, you know, if you've got even like a fear of public speaking, which I see is more common than I think people realize, that people can be anxious about that for years. Now, it might not be what we would term as a mental health condition, but is it going to impact somebody mentally because they're starting to worry about presentations a week before the presentations and they're not sleeping? Absolutely. So I think some of this is also as being able to look beyond the labels, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think that's right, because like you said, you come in and out of different phases of your life, and sometimes externally something might look really stressful, but you're doing okay. And other times people will be like, well, what? I can't see anything wrong externally, but actually there's loads of stuff you just can't see because it's someone else's life. But very rarely do things stay exactly the same, like how well you can cope, and your resilience comes up and down all the time. Yeah, and I think actually that's something we could talk about more as managers as well, of being like, you know, that bit was rubbish, but now I'm doing okay, and next month might be really great. And that is, again, a normal pattern. None of us can work at 100% all the time, because it's just not possible.
Absolutely. And it's the whole perception thing, you know. When I hear people say today's going to be really stressful, like, you don't know that. You don't know that. You just made a massive assumption, because life is just a series of moments. You know, there's no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there's only right here and right now. And yet we can look at our calendar and we can almost kind of hypnotize ourselves into this is what it's going to be like. And when we can really help people to understand that our responses are from the inside out and not from the outside in, then I think that's certainly going to give people a far greater sense of control over their emotions, over their responses. So final question from me, Jess, but thinking about this new world that HR leaders like you face, what do you think are going to be some of the biggest challenges for them going forward?
So I think there's a few right now, and I think some of those are kind of directly related to the past couple of years and how work has changed for quite a lot of us. So I think the challenge around what does a workplace look like now, I think is a big challenge. And I think that sometimes I think it's easy to think, well, it has to be like this, like that kind of one size fits all again. But actually, from my experience, actually it's what works for your organization and your people, and that's going to be slightly different for everybody. You can absolutely learn from other organizations. Some people have obviously worked in that way for decades and are really generous with what's worked, what hasn't worked. But I think if you're too rigid, you're asking for trouble. And we've seen, haven't we, on social media and all the news, organizations say we're doing it like this, and their employees all say, all right then, bye, I'm going to go work for someone else. So I think, you know, the decisions that are being made around that will really impact on retention, but also recruitment of new people. And if you want the best talent, you really have to get on top of that and be able to give a good answer about why you've made the decisions you've made for that organization. I think recruitment is obviously at the minute really, really difficult. And some of that is linked to exactly that. It's like, what is your workplace like? What does your organization do and why? I think, you know, we're seeing people really question about what they want to do in a career or in a job right now. And that's a really good thing. But equally, from a HR point of view, that can cause some real headaches. And I think maybe the last thing that's coming up as well, and again, really linked to that, is this idea around a 4-day working week. And I think, again, that could maybe be too rigid as a concept. So I would say I'm absolutely in favour of us all working less hours a week. But it doesn't mean that you have to close your business on 1 day a week. It doesn't mean everyone has to do those hours within 4 days. There is much, much more flexibility around that. And again, I think so long as you can work out what's best for your organisation, what allows your people to be output focused rather than location or hours focused, then I think you're onto a winner. It's not easy doing that. It's not easy at all. But I think there's enough skills and great people in HR to really be able to steer that well.
Absolutely. No, they're fantastic. Absolutely fantastic points, Jess. Well, I feel like I could continue to talk to you for ages. I really, really have loved our conversation. I think it's been so insightful, and I'm sure for everybody tuning in, it's given them a huge amount of food for thought. So certainly from me personally, a massive shout out to you and the work that you're doing at Blood Cancer UK, a massive shout out to all of your people, all of your fundraisers, all of your, oh gosh, I can feel emotional, all of your volunteers, for everything that they do. And if you want to hang on to the line, for all our listeners, if you have any questions, comments, then do drop them into the comment box. But thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.